What lies beyond the realms of human understanding, and what are you willing to give up in order to discover it? We're taking a quick peek at Conarium. Conarium is a first-person puzzle adventure game by Zoetrope Interactive, a development studio with a bit of an obsession with Lovecraftian themes. H.P. Lovecraft's stories, such as The Call of Cthulhu and The Shadow over Innsmouth, have inspired a great deal of things within popular media. Call of Cthulhu itself is the title of a role-playing game in a similar vein to Dungeons & Dragons. There have been multiple board games, like Elder Sign and Mansions of Madness, that use the themes of forbidden knowledge, non-human influences over humanity from beings beyond our possibility of understanding, as well as the risks of early 20th century scientific endeavors to discover the meanings behind the universe and what may or may not lie beyond. These shared themes of ancient elder gods and otherworldly dimensions that twist the fabrics of the human mind found their way to computer games as well. Both Prisoner of Ice and Shadow of the Comet were point-and-click adventure games inspired by Call of Cthulhu itself, along with many other titles using these ideas for world building or as an example of how they can create their own fantastical worlds. Both Elder Sign and Mansions of Madness got their own digital versions as well, so there's quite the market for this sort of thing. Zoetrope's previous two games, Darkness Within 1 in Pursuit of Loth Nolder and its sequel, delved into the depths of Lovecraftian thematic literature, as both titles took an unsuspecting main character down the path of paranormal madness and into an unexpected world. Conarium does something similar, but changes the script with how it uses its characters. For those without a medical background, or who've just never thought of searching for Conarium on Wikipedia, it's another name for the pineal gland found within your brain. This gland's primary function is to create melatonin, a hormone that regulates sleep. Not only is that an interesting fact for the day, but it also is somewhat important to the game's story, as the main character, Frank Gilman, is a specialist in this part of the brain, which makes him a rather important member of the Abuat Base expedition crew near the South Pole in Antarctica. Due to some of the expedition's discoveries, many crew members have been suffering from all kinds of nightmares and sleep issues. Frank himself regularly finds himself within a dreamlike state of navigating his own memories or viewing visions of the past through painful headaches. Conarium is also the name Frank's boss, Dr. Faust, has given to strange ancient devices that connect our earthly realm with some sort of unknown dimension. The ancient Conariums have become a bit of an obsession for the Doctor, and that's how Frank finds himself waking up within their Arctic base with one of the world's greatest cliches, amnesia. Frank seems to be unable to remember much about their expedition after the initial arrival, nor the strange device strapped to his glove, or why everyone else besides himself has completely vanished. When Zoetrope Interactive set about figuring out what kind of gameplay their psychological horror titles should have, they originally started with a point-and-click design, not too dissimilar to that of older first-person point-and-clicks like Starship Titanic and The Seventh Guest. They used this style of gameplay for the first Darkness Within title, but changed to smoother movement with the second one, as well as Conarium. It plays more like what people would label as a walking simulator these days, those narratively driven exploration games, but Conarium still leans on some of its point-and-click roots with puzzles that need to be solved in order to progress. Since the main character can't remember anything about recent events and has no one to explain them to him, plus is in somewhat of a point-and-click adventure game, that means the only solution is to break into everyone's room and rifle through all this stuff. Really, a lot of the game is just figuring out which doors you have access to will open and which ones are either locked or stuck. Stuck doors only exist for the purpose of set dressing, but if a door is locked, then it's more than likely you'll have to figure out how to get into it at some point in the future. While not being an exact straight line, the game's level design is rather linear and straightforward. As long as players fully explore each area before moving on to the next one, they will most likely find all the pieces they need in order to advance. Being inspired by point-and-click games, many of Conarium's puzzles are find thing to use on thing, like find key to use on locked door, or find mystical otherworldly artifact to activate some ancient and odd piece of machinery. There are some more in-depth puzzles to deal with every now and then, but thankfully there are generally enough hints lying about to give players an idea of what they need to do. Throughout Frank's travels, he'll come across an endless trail of documents detailing things about the expedition, its crew, and their discoveries throughout the more recognizable areas, as well as a plethora of strange carvings within the long-lost ruins Frank and his friends are investigating. While there's no requirement to read through everything unless you happen to be invested in the story, anything of note you come across is saved in a journal, and there always seems to be some kind of convenient clue or hint nearby any puzzle. I personally only had any real trouble with one particular puzzle that caused me to look up its solution in a walkthrough. I generally rate puzzle games like this based on how often I have to use a walkthrough versus being able to figure out what to do on my own. While it took me some time to figure out what to do next in a couple of situations, this one particular puzzle just didn't make any sense. Even after seeing the solution, I still can't figure out what alluded to it nor how I was supposed to figure it out in the first place. This is usually a problem that comes with point-and-click games due to specific odd logic to catch players off guard. But it seemed rather out of place compared to the rest of the game's puzzle design, let alone with it being more of a logic-based puzzle than a use-thing-on-thing one. Getting stuck in Conarium is a trial of patience. Not just because it means you have to figure things out before progressing, but more due to where you may be stuck and all of the areas Frank has access to at that time. The game has a good amount of loading screens, and it can sometimes take a while to get through them. Constantly going up and down an elevator with a loading screen to search for a clue for a puzzle is rather, irritating, to say the least. I somewhat understand the long loading times due to the game's overall high graphical quality. Conarium, at times, is a gorgeous game to look at. The developers did a fantastic job of setting a creepy mood with just barely too dark hallways and a great use of particle effects in some areas. Personally, I feel that the base itself has some of the best looking areas in the game, even if many of them are more plain to look at than the long abandoned ruins. The game just doesn't do natural visuals as well as it does man-made ones. Things like snow or cave walls feel a bit out of place with lower quality ground and earth texture work. The jarring split between the visuals for these areas made most of the dark and mysterious ruins less interesting in comparison, even though those areas were filled to the brim with Lovecraftian elements. Otherworldly machines and statues of odd beings litter the empty halls of the ruins, only brought to life on the rare occasion of a vision of the past or an immediate threat. There are a couple of areas within Conarium where it attempts to join many modern horror games in the style of Amnesia: The Dark Descent or the Outlast games. Even though Frank has access to an axe he could use to defend himself from any kind of adversary that may be lurking in the shadows, for some reason, he can't. Instead, he can only run around and avoid them. Thankfully, these parts are few and far between and extremely short at that, but I still can't get over the fact that there is an axe you specifically have to pick up in order to break through walls to advance in the game, but you can't use it to defend yourself. I get it, they're otherworldly beings and probably really scary if met in real life, but I mean, come on! If you can break down a stone wall with this thing, Frank should be able to hack off a limb or two at least. As I said, these encounters are rather short, and that's particularly one of the big problems I have with Conarium altogether. The game has an annoying habit of introducing a mechanic and then hardly ever using it. You remember that watch I said Frank had on his glove when he woke up all the way back at the start of the game? He has that thing throughout the entire game, but I never figured out what in the world it was supposed to do. Sometimes it would beep, but mostly it just did nothing, and that really feels like a missed opportunity to me. Later on, Frank finds a crystal he can charge up to move some kind of poisonous plants out of its path, but that's all it's ever used for, and not that often at that. The only mechanic that was well thought out and deeply implemented into Conarium's gameplay was the section where Frank has to drive a submarine. That section is initially interesting since the craft has some really intuitive controls, but I felt it long overstayed its welcome, while other parts hardly ever began before they were over. I'm not a big fan of the hide-and-seek style of horror games, but I feel the devs could have done something interesting with it due to the Lovecraftian themes they were playing with, instead of only using it maybe twice for a few minutes. Overall, I enjoyed Conarium, even if it is rather a short game. According to Steam, I've spent 5 hours in the game total, but that's with having replayed areas to find hidden trophy items and secrets, as well as viewing multiple endings. The game does use an autosave system, but unlike most titles with this feature, the autosave doesn't save over a previous file. Instead, it creates a new save file that can later be loaded at any time. It ends up being more like a level select mechanism than a usual autosave. Narratively, I found Conarium rather interesting, though I won't spoil it here. Zoetrope created a great Lovecraftian story with some rather clever bits hidden here and there that some people may not notice. One in particular is the Arctic base itself, Apawat, being named after an Egyptian deity whose name means opener of ways, similar to how Frank and Dr. Faust are attempting to open a way between their universe and whatever may lie beyond it through the use of the Conariums. Even though the game's visuals may be a bit of a mixed bag, the way it uses music and sound effects to create atmosphere is top-notch. Any music is extremely subtle, keeping players on edge, while ruins crumble away and hallways remain eerily silent. The devs really nailed it on creating atmosphere, and it's probably my favorite part of the game altogether. While Conarium may be a tad on the short side and light on mechanics, I still really enjoyed my time with it and feel that anyone who has an interest in puzzle games or Lovecraftian literature will as well. The best part is that, unlike an increasing amount of horror games, it doesn't rely on jump scares to keep players on edge. Instead, it uses the mysteries of the unknown as well as some fantastic atmosphere and great use of lighting to keep things tense only when they need to be. Conarium is available on Steam for $19.99, and if you're looking for something a bit more laid back than your typical action game with some great atmosphere, interesting visuals, as well as being on the creepy side of things, I'd say give it a shot. Thanks for watching, please let me know what you think of the game or this video in the comments section. I'm Mega Pie Man, and I'll talk to you guys later. Want to see more quick peeks? Click on the video on the left for Super Blood Hockey, a game that makes hockey even more violent. Or click on the right video for a 3D platform game, Skylar and Pluck's Adventure on Clover Island.